Well, I apologize. It looks like we had a archive recording crash. So I'll have to find a way to recover that. But we were here just quickly discussing design documents as part of our preparation and workflow discussion. The start of our slides here. And from a design document, we described it as similar to a business plan where it is a document to kind of get a project started. If you were to get investors or get a loan from a bank or get money to start a business, you would need a business plan to describe all aspects of that business. For a game, something in a very loose way, a design document exists if they need to find investors for a game or sell it to a publisher. Then a design document often exists describing all sorts of different aspects of a game. And I jumped over to this website, gameproject.fullsail.com/gpgames. And this is a website run by the Game Development Degree Program. And these are final projects from the game development program from students. And they are divided up into a certain number of teams each month. They have a number of months to work on their project, and they create a game. And you can access any one of these games. Read a little bit about it, watch a video, see some screenshots. There's contact information of the folks making the game. You can actually download the game. However, these are often PC-based games. So if you do have a PC, you could get access to the games. But there are also design documents. And these design documents give a lot of information about what the game is about and the description of it. And they are good resources for understanding what the games are all about and what the students are working on, and just getting an insight into different types of games. Definitely on the size and scale of starting out in the industry, where you start out with smaller games and you build up your kind of repertoire of projects and your reputation of building interesting games, and it builds up over time. So a design document gives you information, and it gives everybody working on the team. It's not just for the music composer, but it is a general document talking about what the game is about, who are the characters, what's the story all about, what are the objectives, who are the good guys, the bad guys, all the weapons and vehicles and missions that you might go on. There's information about the technology, how the game is going to be built. Is it going to be a mobile game? Is it going to be a console game? All of the technology involved. And in this design document, there's also a section about music. Maybe you open up, it's a PDF, and you scroll through and you find the music section, and it says, to be determined by music composer. And sometimes that's good because you are the music composer, and that gives you a lot of creative control over the direction of the music for the game. Sometimes it's bad because you have no clue what the client may ultimately want, and trying to come up with all of the creative ideas working in a larger team might be a bit more difficult overall. So it all depends on the game and the project. So hopefully you can get information. This literally keeps people all on the same page when people are talking about characters or what something's going to look like or sound like. They can reference some documentation as to what is going to be built. So hopefully there's something to access and get. Let's see, I got something here, that document that I downloaded. Let's check out their game here. Let's see if this opens up. All right, so this is 20 pages on their game and what it's all about and how they created it, and I'm sure there's screenshots in here somewhere. Oh no, this is all of the information. So there's all sorts of different things you can check out that's available through the game final project. Let's see. All right. Included, hopefully with a design document, you might get access, or you will need to have an asset list at some point. And an asset list is a listing of all of the WAV files that you will be creating for the game, or all of the media files. It is typically an Excel spreadsheet that that lists the name of the file, the format of the file, how it is organized, does it loop or not, any sort of notes that might go along with it. And it gives everybody something to point at to say exactly what's going to be created and how it's going to be created. So if you have a list of you agree on in a contract with your client, you say, okay, I'm going to deliver you these 10 audio files, or these 100 audio files, or 1,000 audio files, or whatever it is. I'm going to deliver you 60 minutes of music or 15 minutes of music, however much is necessary. And it is a list of all of those files. These are the files I'm going to create. This is what they're going to be named. So when you go into, when the game developer goes into the code and makes the actual game, they make sure to play the right audio file. So if you name the files correctly and they name them correctly in the code, then you don't have to know anything about the code and they don't have to know anything about the music, and the computer puts it all together. So the asset list is a great way of tracking how you're getting paid also. You can say, I will deliver you these 100 files and you will pay me X amount of money. If they need more, then okay, I can make you more audio files, I can make you more music, but you'll just pay me more money according to our previous rate. So if I need to create another 100 sounds, then you'll pay me the same amount of money. If they don't use all 100 of sounds, if 100 sounds are created and we agree that this is what the game needs, then they end up using 90 out of the 100 sounds because they took out one of the levels or something changed in the game. Well, that's fine. I created 100 files. I delivered those according to our contract. If you don't use them, then that's on you. That's on the client, as long as everything was agreed in a contract in an asset list. Now, asset lists can grow and shrink, and it's not always that you will not be flexible and be able to accommodate whatever the client needs and whatever the project requires. But it's if documentation or a contract doesn't exist, then they can have the opportunity of making it a bit more work for you as the game shifts in size and grows and shrinks. So an asset list lays it all out for everybody as they are starting, so that we know what exactly is going to be delivered. Concept art. This just in the way that you might create some conceptual music that inspires the artists, maybe in a series of back and forth emails or phone calls. The client says, okay, we're going to make an ogre game, and these ogres are going to come in and raid the local town village, and the hero is going to go out and attack the ogres. And so here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, and here's the environment and the world that things are going to exist in. And maybe it's a stick figure drawing all the way up to concept art, to 3D models, to animation, to things actually working in the game. The game gets built over time. All of the art needs to be created over time, just in the same with the way that the music does. So initially, everybody's throwing ideas, and it inspires more ideas back and forth. And the more visuals that you can get your hands on, the easier it will be to understand the creative direction for your music. A game build. Our assignments, all of the games that are provided with the weekly assignments are game builds. They are a working version of the game They are typically not a complete version of the game. Sometimes they're known as a vertical slice, a slice or a sliver or a part of the overall game. It's just one level of maybe the 10 total levels of our game. It is no, I mean, you might notice that our each week a 2D platformer and Angry Bots. Well, Angry Bots is more of a complete game, but maybe it's just one level of a much larger game. 2D platformer isn't really a complete game. It's, I mean, it's fun and it's got lots of things to do in it, but there's like not really an ending. It just kind of keeps going and going. You just get a higher and higher score, which might be certainly fun in its own right. So eventually you will get actual working versions of the game. And then a bit more time after that, you'll actually get working versions of the game that has your music working in it along with the rest of the game. So any actual working technology that you can get your hands on can be extremely useful. And then you often want some easy way to cheat your way through the game so that you can quickly maneuver and move your way around the game so that you can make sure that the game at the music at the end of the level or at the end of the game is just as good as the beginning of the game, and you don't want to have to fight your way through every single level to get to the big monster at the end. Fight the monster for 10 minutes just to realize that the wrong music plays when you win or lose. That takes a much too long amount of time. You just want to get in there, kind of cheat your way to the end and say, okay, monster win, now monster lose, and see what happens and make sure that it plays back correctly. So I talked to another composer working on slot machines in a casino. These are a very commonplace, a common client out there. A lot of casino slot machines are in the key of C, or maybe they might go to, or they often do go to A minor. That way, if all of them are in a relative scale, then they don't sound too dissonant when a million of them or 1,000 of them are playing together in a casino. And so the company sent a version of the game to him so that he can start making the music, and then he had to go back and ask for a way to cheat his way through the slot machine games because he needed to write music for when you get 3 cherries and 3 bars and when you hit a jackpot, and he had to sit there and roll, pull the slot over and over and over again to actually get to those values to see what it looks like and actually write the music for it. So hold on just a sec. So a vertical slice or a working version of the game is always helpful to get started. Well, maybe not at the very, very beginning, but as soon as possible to get access to a working version of the game. Research. This should be something that is an ongoing part of your career, which means keeping up with the industry, keeping up with classic tropes of story and character and music and certainly games. Game research would be constantly involved in the industry and playing games and understanding what's the newest and latest and popular and best sounding games out there. This is some of the best part of the work and also sometimes the hardest, or I mean, certainly not hard to play games by any means. It should be enjoyable, but to find the time to, I mean, a lot of these games take a lot of time investment. I have a large backlog of games that I'll eventually get to if there's a break from working on a game. So I know a lot of folks that will have a stack of games ready to go when they're done with their game. They've been put their nose to the grindstone for a couple of months finishing out their game, and then they'll have like a month or so as the kind of relief as the game is being sold and they're reaping the rewards. And they'll take some time to see what the industry has been doing, what their competitors have been doing, and keeping up. Same thing goes with story research, music research. If your game is set in a particular either a pre-existing story world. It takes classic themes and archetypes from classic literature, or it is a what other aspect of my thing? Following a particular character. If the game takes place in a particular culture or time period or historic event, there's certainly a lot of research that is necessary. So keeping up on a knowledge of the classics plus modern and pop culture, understanding where your game takes place and where your soundtrack also fits in with that. And finally, with music research, that doesn't just pertain to the game industry. It's also whatever part of the music industry that you're interested in. I've mentioned before that clients speak in terms of previous music, previous project, artists, albums, games, soundtracks, and so they will refer to, and if you don't already have knowledge, then very quickly you will get very familiar with that style of music so that you can recreate it in a much more realistic way for your project. Sound palette. This is gathering all of your tools together for a new project. You can't be expected to own every single musical instrument or sound out there, or be able to play them all, or record and perform all of them in your home studio. So if your game requires a unique instrument or a unique performance or a sound library that you don't have access to, or some piece of software, you need to work this out with the client. Sometimes this is paid for directly by the client, where it is understood that we are going to need so many hours or days in a particular studio with a small set of orchestral performers. We are going to need a particular performance from some style of music that we don't have access to, or we need this particular sound of this guitar or drum or brass or string or keys or whatever it is. And either that's part of the negotiated budget, or some clients would rather understand just kind of a flat rate of how much is this going to cost me, and you can roll all of those costs directly into it. But you need to account for all of that. The money that you bid or pitch to a client is not going 100% into your pocket. You need to make sure that you buy all of your tools, your instruments, your all the software, hardware that you need to get the job done. You get all of the studio hours scheduled and paid for, all of your performers paid for, so that the money that's left over, and if you can make that as efficient as possible, then maybe there's more left over at the bottom line when the project's done. It all depends on, and often what happens in the beginning is you under budget, you cut yourself in your cost or your bid, and you might screw yourself over a couple of times as you're learning what is common and what is the proper rates to charge, and make sure that it works out for you in the end, and you account for all of the hidden things that pop up and the little surprises in the production of a project. All right, we're going to get into our next topic here of game genres. As we are figuring out what music we need and how much we need and where does it all go in our game, discussing game genres will give us some of the expectations that an audience might have for a particular type of game. Game genres are similar, or at least in this way, to music genres, in that there are tons of different types of game genres, tons of different types of music genres. There are all types of games that don't neatly fit into a genre, break all sorts of genres, or cross different genres. So a lot of things you could find blow all sorts of holes in how things perfectly fit into a previous existing genre or box. And that's often the fun of a game, is that it transcends just this nice, neat classification of it. But we're going to make our genres as big and wide and generic as possible so that they fit a lot of different types of games. And we'll just talk about the general expectations of the music and the soundtrack and the overall style and approach, so that when somebody says, hey, we're going to make a racing game or an action game or an adventure game or a sports game or a kids game or a puzzle game, you know generally what might be expected from that type of game or that type of music soundtrack. So hold on, we're going to take a quick pause before we get into this. But we will start out with arcade games. All right. So, starting out with our first genre here, arcade games. It certainly was. There was a time when the only way that you could play games was to go to these places in your local mall or movie theater, big rooms that had these loud machines that ate your quarters called arcades. And these machines were there making a whole lot of noise to attract your attention. You threw your quarter into the machine, you got 3 lives, and you played whatever that game was. The music and sound was probably pretty repetitive, often based off of level 1 and level 2 and level 3 as you progressed through the game. Um, Based off of shorter looping musical themes, often quite memorable and catchy, and as not to annoy the player because they heard them over and over again. Arcade machines were typically based off of pretty short experiences. The games were often generally built to eat your quarters as fast as possible. So you had to be really good and practice a whole lot to make it through these games, and that meant that they were eating your quarters over and over again, and you were hearing the same piece of music over and over. Not long after that, let's say that's late 70s and 80s and certainly 90s, and arcades still exist today, certainly a much more few and far between. But let's say around in the 80s, they invented home gaming consoles like the Atari and Nintendo, and you could give the store $200 or $300 worth of quarters and take your game machine home and play it as much as you want. And so we get into home gaming consoles, PC gaming, gaming on the Mac, and arcade games kind of left their kind of reign as king of video games there for a while, and there has been a resurgence more recently in mobile devices. Arcade games have come back in the shape and form of a mobile game, either an iOS game or an Android game on your smartphone or tablet, and they're still pretty short experiences overall. A lot of these games are really not trying. Now, people can get lost inside of Angry Birds or a lot of these other games, Bejeweled or something like that, Flappy Bird or any one of these mobile, very, very popular mobile games. But the game experiences are typically pretty short overall. The music is often based off of shorter looping themes. often very memorable. There's like a main menu music, and then you get into level 1 and 2 and 3, and then there's winning the game and losing the game, and very common gaming experiences, just in the shape and form of lots of different types of puzzle or arcade type games. So this is a great place to get started in the industry. A lot of smaller game developers are making mobile games, getting their feet wet in the industry and finding success. So you can get involved in lots of different types of companies, and if any one of them take off, then you get you were there early on, and you grow with their company. Next one here after arcade games, action games. Now, these are probably on the other side of the spectrum for the size and scale in games and how big they are, how much content, how many hours people play them, the amount of money. I mean, these are often millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in budget and marketing of these games. So these are often the much bigger blockbuster kind of games, trying to mimic kind of the Hollywood movie style and feel and production quality of a game. So action games come in typically two flavors, single player and multiplayer. Those have different needs for the sound and the music. First-person shooters are very, very common, probably the most popular in this genre. So you've got the popular like Call of Duty and Battlefield games, BioShock, Halo, Assassin's Creed, God of War. There's all sorts of, Overwatch is out there right now, is really quite popular. And again, there's all sorts of things that fit and don't really fit into this genre. But there are some basics with the music and the soundtrack. Number one, it's probably pretty big, pretty costly. Not probably the first game you're going to jump right into and get your first credit on. A lot of people have to work up and gain experience to get to this level so that you know how the production is done and how it is successful. I mentioned single player and multiplayer games. So single player games are much more story or narrative driven, where you are the hero in the middle of your own action movie, and the music follows along and builds and ebbs and flows with the action in the game. So the music, while these games are at the peak of technology and pretty epic, and they look amazing and they feel pretty big, often these action games, you're really more like a rat in a maze, kind of finding your way through, and there's a very linear path that you often have to go through to reach from the beginning to the end. So you start at point A at the beginning of the level, and you fight your way through point B and C and D all the way to the end of the level at point Z, and the game's over, or that level is over. So with the music, that gives you the ability it's almost like, or often referred to as breadcrumbs. So you kind of feed the player breadcrumbs and lead them along down this path, down this trail through the story, in a very linear sort of way. And so this makes it a little bit easier. There's still a lot of interactivity. You don't necessarily know how long somebody's going to take to get from point A to point B to point Z, but there's a much more linear path that eventually they will be going down. Now, once you get into multiplayer games, well, let's do this. Single player is the human player versus the computer. Multiplayer games is the human player versus a whole bunch of other humans on over the internet. So you have 2 or 4 or 8 or 10 or 12 or 16 or 32, 64 people playing each other all simultaneously across many servers across the internet. And so a lot of times the music is less important and sometimes even turned off during battles because people are looking for a tactical advantage in listening for particular sound effects and dialogue. so the music is often less used. Plus, when you get into multiplayer and it's human versus human, you don't know what's going to go on. You don't know who's winning or, well, beforehand, you do not know who is winning or losing or who's going to succeed in the game until it's actually played. Now, you can respond to it, but it through the music, but it becomes a bit more difficult to understand exactly how to make this sort of feel like a linear soundtrack that mimics the experience. So multiplayer music is less common overall, but they have different uses for the music through the different types of games. Our next genre here, adventure games. Adventure games are still on the size and scale of action games, and there are a lot of games that really kind of blur back and forth between what do you actually mean by an action or adventure game. But generally what we're talking about here in an adventure game is an open world exploration game, where often you are set in the middle of a world, a story, where again you are the hero, but there isn't such a linear path for you to travel down. You might a lot of these adventure games have their history or lineage through fantasy games, fantasy worlds, magic and wizards, and the world of in game history. It would probably be more in the line of Legend of Zelda, but that certainly goes back through Dungeons and Dragons and The Lord of the Rings. And so these sort of fantasy games, but Rockstar is very good at making modern or Western versions of these, with Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, where they are open worlds. World of Warcraft has had people playing in it for over a decade, and they just keep creating more content and more storylines. And these become massive worlds where the player does not go through the game story from point A to point B to point C all the way to point Z. They can go and kind of go through the story in their own way or their own pace. And so they start at point R and they go to D and they go to Q and over to Z and then back to A. They just go over in all sorts of different directions. And your music has to account for that. So while an action game has a much more linear kind of path through it, an open world adventure game, you don't know when anything is going to happen. You know what is possible. You know that they have to the hero has to save the town, and they have to go defeat the dragon, and they have to storm the castle, and there's all of these things, missions and objectives and storyline that they have to do. But you have no clue when they're actually going to do it. Is it going to take them days and weeks and months to get there? And so your music in these games is often based off of location, not a timeline. Like, you know what is possible, but you don't know the when. And so if you don't know when, something else you can use is always where, right? So we always know where the player is because it's a game, it's a piece of software. We can always try to track where the player is at. So we don't know when you're going to get to the evil cave with the dragon in it, but we know once you get there, there's going to be evil cave music. So these types of games are often based off of location, or the music is driven off of location or proximity. Proximity kind of works directly with location. Proximity is how close are you to that cave, or how close are you to danger, or how close are you to enemies, or how many enemies are around you, might dictate how the music changes and what you hear. So adventure games become much more open world. Grand Theft Auto, I know a lot of people don't play Grand Theft Auto to actually play the story or go through the game. I've never actually, I think I beat one Grand Theft Auto and went all the way through the storyline. But most of the time it's just go in there and do all sorts of crazy stuff and have fun with it. And Red Dead Redemption was it's basically Grand Theft Auto in the Wild West. So it's kind of an open kind of world that allows you to explore around. Often defined as hardcore games, these games are often pretty large in their content. their storylines, their soundtrack, how much music they might need for them. People play these games for 10, 20, 50, or 100 hours or more. They need a lot of content in these games. They just get bigger and bigger. And our last genre here is sports games. And sports games are often trying to mimic the realistic experience of the music that you would hear at an arena or at a stadium, or at the sports game or the event. So the music in sports games are often licensed popular music from current artists or past artists, in the same way that you would go to a basketball game or a football game or a baseball game and hear popular music, not just some pre-recorded soundtrack. So there's very little custom proprietary music for a soundtrack in a sports game. Most of it is licensed. NBA 2K16 or all the NBA 2K games are extremely dedicated to their soundtrack that they create. All of EA Sports games, especially Madden, are always putting out soundtracks along with their game. It's a great way for an up-and-coming artist to gain exposure, because people play the game over and over and over again, and when they go through the menus or through the gameplay, they'll see and hear the music over and over again. So it's not typically a place where you are going to send your music and they pick you up. Working with the audio directors at EA Sports, they often tell us that they get submitted CDs and links to SoundCloud and Bandcamp pages and all this stuff all the time, many a day, and they can't listen to any of them because of security reasons, for issues of copyright. If for some reason they were listening to this music and then they went separately days or weeks or months later and wrote a piece of music that maybe somehow could kind of be determined that it sounds like some other piece of music that they may have heard ahead of time, then they don't want to run that risk at all. Even if it's was not the source, they don't want to run the risk of having any sort of legal liabilities from unsolicited music. So it's often one of those things of don't call us, we'll call you. They search around on online charts, Billboard charts, and new music charts, and find artists that are, so they know they're going to release a new Madden game every single year. And they know about 6 or 8 months ahead of time, before they release it. They need to be building up, well, they probably have a constant rotating list of artists that might be good to be involved. But they get their list together and they negotiate all the deals with all the clients and create a soundtrack. And so they are often scouring their sources, and they'll find the particular artist that they want to deal with. So that's not just going for traditional sports games, that's certainly extreme sports, or I would even expand this topic out to be called realistic games, or trying to mimic a experience games that are trying to mimic a realistic experience. Whether it's a racing game or extreme sports game, it's still a video game. It's not really like that. In Tony Hawk, you can certainly skate into a crazy degree that no human can actually skate. Same thing goes with Madden and the traditional sports. There's things in there that are larger than life. And so the music might need to fit whatever is needed for the game. All right, so discussion of different game genres and the general expectations for those games. The next topic here is locations, where the music might actually fit into the game. A lot of times in the earlier stages of game development, you write music to fit emotion or character, general storyline points whether you winning music or losing music or happy music or sad music. You might write music in more generic sense with some specific reason or intention, but a lot of times you just write the music to get the content together, and then you can figure it out from there. So locations are going through kind of the timeline of the game and figuring out where music might fit in. So the first one here, cinematics and cutscenes. These are the little movies that play in the middle of the game or during the gameplay, that give a little bit more of the story, tell a little bit more of the background of the character, give you more insight to what's going on. Cinematics, you often don't have control, and they are often a linear, almost like a little movie. So at the end of each game level, you have a 60 to 90 second long cutscene that reveals more of the story. So you know that you have, so you do a minute each, and you have 10 levels. So there's 10 minutes of music that you need to write. Earlier in games, the cutscenes were a little higher quality, and then you get into the game itself, and it looks a little bit different. Like there was a difference between the cinematics and the actual gameplay. But nowadays, a lot of these movies are actually being done in the game engine, and there's really no difference between what you see and hear between the gameplay and the pre-scripted movies. So these cutscenes are a very comfortable place for the composer to work in, because they are like a traditional linear video. Another type of cutscene is the intros and endings. Games are notorious for having beautiful intro scenes, and then the ending, you get to the end, it's like, thank you, your quest is over, just start all over again. That was my first disappointing one in Super Mario Brothers when I finally made it to the end. So the game, you have to leave a little bit of good stuff for the ending of the game. You have to, okay, so there's going to be a 5-minute intro video at the beginning. There's going to be a 5-minute ending video at the end, or there's multiple endings in the game that they all have to have different music for. So these sorts of things need to be predetermined while they're creating the game, and you might have some music set aside that fits. In-game and action. This is where the player is actually playing the game. This is the most difficult area to write music for, because once the player has control over the game, you don't have any clue what they're going to do. You don't know if they're going to run in as fast as possible, just completely quickly defeating the enemy, or if they're going to go run and hide in a corner and spend 10 minutes there just kind of going in circles, never progressing forward. So your music has to be able to change and respond to any of those situations. So this is going to require the most discussion and interaction with the game team, so that you make sure that the music plays back. This is the idea of Angry Bots is separated into ambient and action. 2D platformer is set up in intros, main loops, and endings. So there is a much more interactive setup for the music. Compare that against a movie that, hey, we have a 90-second long cutscene at the end of the level, and it just plays back one piece of music. So a lot of games have adopted what is known as a board switch, and Nintendo games were pretty good at this, where the music just loops around. A lot of times if you're stuck in a particular part of the game, the music will go around and around, just trying to wait until you actually find the next part of the story. So a board switch, some games include what's commonly known as a board switch, where the music will stop after 3 times. Let's say the music is played through 3 times, it's headed into the 4th, Well, we want to activate the board switch. We don't want to bore the player with playing the same music over and over again, so we're just going to switch it off. And it's going to fade out nicely at the end, and we'll just hear ambiances and the footsteps and Foley of the character. And then when the player actually finds the next part of the game, then the music will swell back in like it was meant to the entire time. So just this is where the player has the control and becomes a much more difficult area and a lot more design and focus on how it's going to be built and work. Menu and UI, probably second to the actual game itself. The player is going to be in a menu somewhere. Whether it's just the start menu when they're starting up the game, they're choosing their level, they're choosing their character. Maybe it's a pause menu where you hit start or pause and you choose your new weapon, or you choose your armor, your skin or character that you have in the game. You look at a map or a journal. There's all sorts of different things that happen in a pause screen or in a menu. So often, menus can be kind of a last-minute thought in a game. Depends on how much design they put into it. But there is often, it's pretty tedious creating setups and music and sound for a menu, because there's lots of little buttons and bleeps and bloops that happen in the menus, but you're probably not going to win any amazing awards for your menu music and sounds. So it's kind of like footsteps in a game, where if it's good, then nobody notices it and it's well done. But if it's done poorly, then everybody notices it very, very quickly, and it becomes repetitive over and over and over again as people click around inside of the menu. So you got to consider where the menu is at and how much content is needed for that. Are you just going to play the same piece of music from level 1 in the main menu? It all depends on how you want it set up. Game trailers. It is common that the soundtrack to the game is not necessarily the music used in the advertising or in the trailer. Meaning, game trailers go to trailer houses just in the same way that movie trailers do. And a lot of movie trailers do not use music from the movie. They use trailer music. And so it's just important to understand where your music is used. Is your music actually used in the marketing of the game? Is there a different rate that is required for that? This really brings up the topic of all of the different places that your music can be used. It's not just in the game. It can be in the marketing, the advertisement, if they maybe have a mobile app, if they have a online website and web page or web game, if it is used on multiple different consoles. A lot of times that's all rolled into the price if you release on Xbox and PlayStation and the Nintendo Wii, but those could be available for negotiation if necessary. Is your game being distributed digitally? Is it being distributed in a physical box? Is it being distributed internationally? These are all considerations for your music and how it is used. A lot of times it's just a work for hire. This is often why a game company would much rather work in a work for hire, so they don't have to go through and draw up contracts and have their lawyers go through every single way or instance that this music is going to be used. They would just rather do a flat buyout fee. They'll pay more money to acquire all of the rights. Right. Next thing we're going to get into is game music themes. So the previous slides were where the music might end up in the game, kind of in the timeline, the beginning of the game, levels, cutscenes, marketing for the game. But this one is how do we attach music to more of the conceptual ideas in the game? How do we attach music to characters, to the level itself? How do we connect it to an emotional context. How does the how does the music fit together with the game, and what sort of things can we attach our music to? Basically, person, place, and thing. All of the different ideas that we can connect the soundtrack and how we have it play back. All right, let me take another quick pause before we get back into this topic. All right, so game music themes. What sort of ideas, concepts can we attach to our game? So, first one would be the main theme. This is the piece of music that becomes most attached to the game in the audience's mind. Often this comes through repetition. Sometimes it comes about from the main menu screen the first time you turn on the game. When it first loads up, that is the piece of music that you hear. So it can become very attached to a game, even separate and away from the game. You heard that hearing that piece of music when outside of playing the game still reminds you directly of the game experience overall. And so you often don't sit down to write the main theme, right? You don't say, okay, today's day one and I'm going to write level one music, and tomorrow's day two and I'm going to write level two music. I'm going to get all the way to the end. I'm going to write the main level music and just kind of go ahead with specifics every single day. You have intentions and ideas, and you write a lot of music just to generate the ideas and get them out and get them started. And then over time, you start plugging in holes. You say, oh, look, here's level 4. This one scene here on level 4, I have this perfect piece of music that fits into the action scene. All I have to do is make it loop and fit the correct size of that part of the game. And as you listen and plug things into the game over and over again, a piece of music becomes very well known, very well liked by the game developers. A lot of times, the game developer or the composer will say, hey, we keep going back to this piece of music, and this really represents the essence of our game, or at least our music soundtrack. So eventually a main theme will show itself over time. A lot of times it will do what I call establishes musical constants. This is ideas and themes in the music that can be rehashed and reused in lots of different ways, whether it's tempo and pacing, whether it's drums, bass, the particular sound of an instrument, or a melodic theme. It establishes these sort of constants that you can use and reuse through your game. If you create a piece of music and the only way that you can think that that piece of music works is that one way that you composed it, it's probably not going to be very useful in a game, because you need to take ideas and break them down into their core components so that you can rearrange them and put them all back together to create a full soundtrack. So it's all about taking it down to its pieces and parts and being able to put it back so that it fits. Leitmotif. very common idea. This is certainly not just limited to games. This is has its history through film and television and stage and theater and literature. And it is the concept of attributing a piece of music to a character, or not just a character, a person, place, thing, idea, concept, pretty much anything that you can come up with. There can be a musical theme that deals with loyalty and friendship. There can be a musical theme that represents solving the puzzle. There can be a musical theme that represents poison and losing health. And all of these are not actual, really identifiable either points in time or things that you might see on a screen, but they represent overall ideas. And so a couple of different common uses of motif throughout history and throughout games. Character theme, very, very common overall. You might be able to hum Link's theme or the Legend of Zelda theme or Mario's theme. Probably Darth Vader enters your brain whenever you see Darth Vader. And we would all love to have an evil musical theme following us, or a happy musical theme, whatever theme represents you, of course. But every once in a while, I would love to have the Imperial March play when I enter the room. Maybe on the first day of class, that would be fun. Character theme, very, very common. Often, or sometimes it can be used to fool the player, right? So that you think they are friendly, and all of a sudden it turns evil and dark, and the music shifts, and all of a sudden you know, oh no, they're not friendly. They're actually a villain or an enemy. So you can do that very, very easily with the music. Level themes. Levels are still a constant in games, or very, very common. And before, levels were a reality of limited technology. You could only load up so much at one time. You couldn't load up the entire game, so they would break it down into separate levels. Now games have become a little bit more open, and they approach loading up the game in a different way. And so maybe you hear a piece of music in a particular level that only exists in that area. It describes a particular location, a particular level, or a particular part of the game. Mortal Kombat was a great example of this, where the only time you heard that music was when you fought that enemy, and you fought that enemy at there in their level. And so there was a piece of music that described each enemy, or each world that they existed in. Mario did this very well with underground or underwater. In Mario, there's only like 3.5 minutes of music in Super Mario Brothers. It's just repeated over and over again across 8 different worlds. There's a theme for above ground. Da 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 da. There's the theme underground. Da 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 da. And then under the water, it's got that waltz to it. It's da 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 da. Oh no, that's not right. It's not coming to me right now. So the different themes, very common and attached to different levels. This goes for like puzzle games, right? You often go through level 1, level 2, and level 3. Different useful concepts of how you might start dissecting a game and figuring out how much music you need. You go through the timeline of the story, figure out all the characters, figure out all the locations, figure out all of the plot points, the twists and turns. Who's good, who's bad, how does it work? Is that even a way to describe the characters in the game? What are the events? Where does it all take place? What are the objects? Anything that you can come up with. And hopefully what it will create is a list of ideas that you can start generating music for, so that you can fit it all into the game. All right, our last topic here we want to get into this. Will start getting us into a little bit of the technology, but before we dive straight into it, I want to do just a bit of history to kind of give us a context of where we have come and where we are at this point in music for games, and we'll do it through the different decades and the different generations of gaming consoles. We'll talk about Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, the Wii. We'll talk about Xbox, Xbox 360, Xbox One. We'll talk about Sega, Sega Dreamcast, Sega Genesis, and PlayStation. PlayStation's the best naming. PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's much more straightforward. And their capabilities for all of the audio. So if you always like to do a trip down memory lane here, do a poll in the chat here of anybody that over what system did you ever play any games on? If you had any of these gaming consoles, did anybody have an original Nintendo? I usually find that most people at some point in their life have played a Nintendo at some time. Which is why referencing Super Mario Brothers works so very well, because most people at some point have experienced Mario, and so we start out with a Nintendo. I could go before that, right? It go like arcade machines, Atari, and television, ColecoVision, those kind of earlier consoles. But Nintendo represents kind of the last of that era in the capabilities of where the music and the sounds were being generated and only by multiple simple waveforms: sine waves, triangle waves, square waves, and noise channel. So consider all of the classic soundtracks that you have heard from a Nintendo games, all those Nintendo themes and melodies that might be rolling around in your brain somewhere. Super Mario Brothers, Tetris, Legend of Zelda, Contra, Metal Gear, Mega Man, Mike Tyson's Punch Out, all these fun, Excite Bike, all these fun games. Actually, I don't know if you saw recently, they have announced that they're going to release a $60 mini Nintendo that comes pre-packaged with like 60 games in it, and it just plugs into your TV and you have a whole bunch of them. So at $60, that's not a bad price for a whole bunch of nostalgia playing all those games, and so I might have to invest a little bit in that. But so consider all of those classic Nintendo games and all of their soundtracks, and this is music and sound effects, were done with 5 monophonic sound channels, simple waveforms. There were 2 pulse waves. Those are like square waves that were typically melody and harmony. The triangle wave could be harmony or bass. And the noise channel was often percussion, kicks, snares, hi-hats. PCM channel, you could actually draw in your own repeating waveform. Could do some pretty interesting, maybe some of the sound effects that way. One of my best examples of the PCM channel is, I don't know if you remember, and way back in Mike Tyson's Punch Out, whenever you knock somebody down, well, Mario was the referee. Mario would come out and he would count and he would go 1, 2, 3, but he wouldn't actually count. It would just kind of sound like words. That was this PCM channel where they could kind of make their own waveform and make it kind of sound like that. So Nintendo was Christmas 1984, 1985. Super Nintendo is Christmas 1989, 1990. And in those 5 years, we got actual recorded audio. You could do up to 8 16-bit 32K voices. Now, you really couldn't actually do that because there wouldn't be much room for the rest of the game. 16-bit 32K is pretty high quality, would be a large audio file, so they didn't really use it all that much. Very simple, very low resolution samples. But you could actually have sampled audio and a separate DSP chip for delay and filter, so you could get real-time effects in your music soundtrack. Now, any Genesis fans out there? Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog, and I actually heard right after I heard the Nintendo, Sega got on that same train, and I think they're going to release a small version in the same way, just to maybe compete. Same would be fun also. So think about Sonic the Hedgehog, a single level in Sonic the Hedgehog where you have all of the sounds existed in 32 kilobytes worth of RAM. So that was the running sounds, the jumping sounds, the monster or the enemy sounds, the coin sounds, the power-ups, all of that stuff existed in only 32 kilobytes worth of RAM. I read, actually going back to the Nintendo, I read somewhere that if you took one instance, there was like, I don't know, less than 1,000 original Nintendo games, I think quite a bit less than 1,000, released. And if you took one instance of all of those games and put them into a single file, they would, into like a single zip file, it would be about 250 megabytes. Because there were only a couple of kilobytes on the original Nintendo cartridges. By the time you get to Super Nintendo and Genesis, you were maybe getting a megabyte worth of space, and that's the entire game and all the graphics and all of the sounds. Not the music in the Sega Genesis was being generated by 6 FM voice Yamaha sound chip, which means Yamaha in the 80s had created the DX7 synthesizer. And the DX7 synthesizer used FM synthesis, is basically the sound of a lot of 80s synth pop. And Sega licensed that technology and got an FM synthesizer in the Sega Genesis. So that's why the music on the Genesis, while it was a couple of years later, it sounds quite a bit better than even the Super Nintendo. Then a couple of years after that, we get the Sega Saturn. One of the first CD-based gaming systems at 650 megabytes. You went from just a less than maybe a megabyte to upwards. I think the Genesis could maybe do 2 or 3 megabytes. The Saturn was, all of a sudden you had 650 megabytes. So you could do video, you could do full recorded audio. You still had an 8-channel FM synthesizer, 16 channels of digital mixing, custom sound chips. So it very quickly, the quality of all of the audio that was capable in the games jumped up pretty quickly. Any Nintendo 64 or PlayStation fans out there? The Nintendo, the cartridges were only about 4 megabytes in those games, but you could do up to 100 channels of audio. But the problem was each channel took 1% of the CPU, so you couldn't actually get to 100 channels, or else there'd be nothing left for the game. You could plug in like your own memory into it and play like MP3s, play your own audio files. So it had some limited capabilities. Had some certainly classic games. Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye. But the fun story between the Nintendo and the PlayStation is that so Sega had come out with the Sega Saturn, a CD-based gaming console. CD's technology had really taken hold. Everybody was listening to CD music at that time. So Nintendo wanted to make a CD-based gaming console. So they licensed and basically hired Sony to make a CD-based gaming console with Nintendo. They actually made a couple of these, and they were dual systems. They had CD technology in the front, and they had a cartridge in the back. And at some point, Nintendo realized that Sony would retain all of the licensing rights and fees for any game that was through the CD-based technology, and Nintendo would retain all of the rights for the cartridge. Well, Nintendo knew that things were kind of headed towards the CD-based technology, so they broke off the contract with Sony, and they went off to make the Nintendo 64 a cartridge-only gaming system. And Sony was left there basically with pretty much a fully working game console. So they said, well, we're just going to go off and and they made the Sony PlayStation. Um, and now we know, many years later, how much of a success it has been. At this point, we get 24 channels, 44K, one of audio, 44.1 kilohertz, CD quality streaming from the disc. You get things like Tony Hawk Pro Skater that has a full punk rock soundtrack, Crazy Taxi. You get full orchestral recorded soundtracks, jazz, rock, hip hop, all sorts of different styles, and it doesn't sound like a synthesizer. It's recorded audio. So at this point, we've pretty much hit the quality mark, where it's CD-based quality, 16-bit 44.1, and next we get into like the quantity. Okay, so we have CDs. How much stuff can we fit? How much audio, how much dialogue, sound effects can we fit on these game discs? Sega Dreamcast. I had a Sega Dreamcast. It was very fun. Lots of cool sports games on it. But for some reason, it was not popular enough to save Sega. That kind of was the last gaming console they created. And but still very powerful. 2 megabytes of RAM for audio. So they went from 32 kilobytes on the Genesis to 2 megabytes on the Dreamcast. So a pretty big jump in their capability of how much stuff they can play simultaneously. You start getting into 3D games. Now they're not just side-scrolling back and forth. They go in, you have depth and dimension, so the audio has to react to distance over space in a game. Then you get into PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 has kind of been the high watermark for success, or for longevity, really, in the gaming industry. The PlayStation 2 came out in 1999, and they made the last game for it in 2013, because with FIFA 2014 was the last game ever made for PlayStation 2. So that went for almost 15 years, which is an eternity in gaming technology. So it doesn't look like even the PlayStation 3 is going to make it that long. They're already talking about making PlayStation 4 is going to take that long, or make it that long. They're already talking about making another one. So PlayStation 2, now you have DVD-based technology, 2 megabytes worth of RAM. That's very common through a lot of these systems. 48 channels. Now we're hitting how much stuff can we do. 5.1 surround sound. How much stuff can we fit into these speakers? Nintendo makes the GameCube. They finally get on some CD-based technology, but it was those little tiny small discs. At this point, Nintendo has really decided not to push the technology envelope. You don't get the most amazing graphics in a Nintendo game, but you know you're going to get an amazingly fun Nintendo game. Nintendo is really, really good at making awesome Mario games and Zelda games and Metroid and all of their different unique properties. So 64 channels, 16-bit, 48K audio. They really haven't done anything amazing at this point with the audio. Disk storage for the Nintendo. But Microsoft now jumps into the game. This is early 2000s. The Xbox is released. The Microsoft had been dominating your office for decades. Very common on a personal computer. But they wanted to take over your living room. They wanted to create a gaming console. I consider kind of the Xbox one of the first fully home entertainment consoles. Not just a gaming system, but it played DVDs, did surround sound, it connected to the internet, it played MP3s, played your music and videos, all sorts of different stuff. So yes, it played great games, but it did a whole bunch of other stuff along with it. 64 channels, 3D voices, 256 stereo voices, 3D panning and spatialization. So now you get not just panning left and right, but you get positioning and spatialization, or what it's like localizing a sound in 3D space and 5.1 all around you. You get 5.1 in the game, 2 megabytes of RAM for the audio. So we've hit pretty much the quantity mark of how much stuff we can fit in there. Now we go into the last generation, which is still probably the most common one. Most people maybe haven't transitioned over to a Wii U or a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox 3, or sorry, an Xbox One. They're still on their Wii and their PlayStation 3 and their Xbox 360. And so with the Nintendo, they're not pushing graphics, they're not pushing that technology, but they introduce motion gaming with the controller. Here in the chat, the TV breaker. Exactly. Now you're flailing around with your arms with the game controller, and you accidentally launch it into the TV. People have broken all sorts of electronics in their house and hit each other as they're flailing around playing their games, which is great. It added into a whole bunch of players to these games. Now your little brother is playing right along with grandma, and everybody, the whole family's playing together. It became just a new way to interact with the game. I actually saw a news story that says the person with the highest score in Wii bowling is an 88-year-old man who's played like 20,300 games, perfect 300 scores in Wii bowling. It is Wii Sports is still the number one selling game out there. And that's kind of cheating because it was included with the Wii, which is like the number one selling game console out there. Extremely popular, but it really didn't do much with the audio. 64 channels of audio. We got a lot of audio channels. Only 88 megabytes worth of RAM total. You compare that against a PlayStation 3. The PlayStation and Xbox now have, for a couple of different years, have basically been neck and neck with the technology. They always come out with these amazing new gaming consoles, and they do have these amazing new games and all sorts of processing power and RAM and hard drive and graphics capability and audio. Now we get full Dolby 5.1 surround sound in games, 512 audio channels. You probably don't want to hear 512 sounds played at the exact same time. Now, if you divide that by 6 and do surround sound, it makes it a little bit more realistic. But 16-bit, 48K, high quality, lots of stuff. By the time you hit PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, kind of the newer consoles overall, we've hit the quality mark for a long time. It sounded really good. Then it's the quantity mark. We hit that also. 512 sounds, 5.1 surround sound. We got tons of stuff happening simultaneously. So now with the newer consoles, newer games, it's like, what can we do with this creatively? What can we do this with interactivity to make it more realistic overall? 5.1 surround sound, 512 megabytes worth of memory, and 50 gigabyte Blu-ray discs. Now we get to Blu-ray. 50 gigabytes allows for Sony PlayStation games to be pretty massive overall. And as the games just get bigger and bigger, we just fill it up with more and more audio and video. Xbox 360, pretty much very comparable. 256 audio channels, 5.1 surround sound, a half a gigabyte in system memory. Xbox games only used 5 gigabyte DVDs, or 4.9 gigabytes. So PlayStation games, if it was a PlayStation exclusive, like an Uncharted or God of War or what else was I just thinking? Last of Us. Those types of games can be much, much larger overall. If you were doing Grand Theft Auto on both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, you had a whole lot more room for higher quality stuff on the PlayStation 3. Now we get into the current consoles. The Wii U, still pretty much the same in technology. The main thing is you get the separate display, a separate portable pad that somebody can interact with. You get a completely separate stereo mix from the tablet than you do from the gaming console. So now in your game you could have two totally separate mixes, two separate things happening, two different people hearing different things. So that makes for some unique audio. The PlayStation 4, not tons known about the inner workings of it. Just a couple of things. We went from 512 megabytes to 8 gigabytes. So they went 16 times the amount of RAM, right? Just kind of the same with your laptop. The more RAM you have in your laptop, the more sound libraries, contact libraries, more samples that you can load up. Same thing with the PlayStation. Now they have 16 times the amount of stuff they can have loaded up simultaneously. The PlayStation has things where you can stream video of your games. You can capture and share video of your games. It can broadcast the audio from your game to the controller directly and then have an output for headphones connected only to your wireless controller. So there's pretty interesting things that they've done with the audio for the PlayStation. And then the Xbox One, again, very comparable in its technology and the specifications. One of the cooler things with the Xbox One is you can actually talk to it. It's got the whole Connect thing. You can say Xbox on, and it'll start playing. You can have it interact. You can actually do that with PlayStation 4 now. But they've done some cool interactivity things with the new Xbox One. And now they've already announced like the Xbox, I think it's called like Scorpio, and the PlayStation, I don't know, Neo, like PlayStation 4.5 and the Xbox 1.5. Those are both supposedly got better graphics and faster processors for virtual reality for all the VR headsets. PlayStation introduced PlayStation VR, the thing you put on your head and interact with games that way. So there's just a lot of new interesting stuff. It's definitely, for how far we've come in, let's say from 85 to 2015, 30 years, how far we've come in audio technology and the amount of stuff that we can do is pretty impressive overall. So that's certainly enough from me from this afternoon. So let's go ahead and wrap up there. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and post it up in the chat. But let's go ahead and I will catch you again on next Tuesday when we meet back up. If you have any, if you have any questions, let me know or send me a message. And other than that, have a good weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Thanks.